Everyone feared the millionaire, until the new waitress silenced him in front of everyone. You're about to witness an incredible story of courage, dignity, and how one moment of bravery can change everything. This is the tale of a young woman who stood up when everyone else looked away, and in doing so, discovered that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who need help the most. If you're ready for this emotional journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our amazing stories. Now, let's dive into this unforgettable tale that will restore your faith in human courage. The Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago stood like a monument to luxury and excess, its 42 floors of gleaming glass and steel reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for more. On the 38th floor in the hotel's most exclusive restaurant, the Pinnacle, the lunch crowd of Chicago's elite gathered daily to make deals that shaped the city's future. It was here, among the crystal chandeliers and panoramic views of Lake Michigan, that everyone knew to fear one man above all others, William Thornton. William Thornton was not just wealthy, he was Chicago royalty. At 55, he had built an empire worth over $800 million through real estate development, aggressive acquisitions, and a reputation for destroying anyone who stood in his way. His companies had reshaped Chicago's skyline, but they had also displaced thousands of families from neighborhoods he deemed ready for improvement. He owned 3 television stations, 2 newspapers, and had enough politicians in his pocket to ensure that city regulations bent to his will like reeds in the wind. The staff at the Pinnacle had learned through painful experience how to navigate William Thornton's presence. He arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 12:30 p.m., always taking the same table, the one with the best view of both the lake and the entrance, so he could see everyone who came and went. His order never varied: a dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, with a specific brand of mustard imported from France that the restaurant kept exclusively for him. The wine had to be a 1982 Chateau Margaux, served at exactly 64 degrees. Any deviation from these specifications resulted in immediate termination of the server responsible. The restaurant's manager, David Chen, had worked at the Pinnacle for 12 years. He had seen servers reduced to tears, sous chefs quit on the spot, and even witnessed Thornton have a bartender blacklisted from every high-end establishment in Chicago for serving him a martini with 2 olives instead of 3. David had learned to survive by becoming invisible, efficient, and never ever making eye contact with Thornton for more than a second. On this particular Tuesday in October, with autumn painting the city in shades of gold and amber, the Pinnacle was facing a crisis. 3 servers had called in sick, likely out of fear as Thornton had been particularly vicious the previous week, humiliating a waiter in front of the entire restaurant for allowing his water glass to remain empty for 30 seconds. The restaurant was short-staffed, and David had no choice but to call in the newest hire, someone who had only completed 2 days of training. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was 26 years old. She had moved to Chicago from a small town in New Mexico just 3 weeks ago, carrying with her a teaching degree, a heart full of hope, and a determination to make it in the big city. The teaching job she had been promised had fallen through due to budget cuts, and she had taken the waitressing position at the Pinnacle out of desperate necessity. Her rent was due in 5 days, and she had exactly $43 in her bank account. Eleanor arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted the pristine white shirt and black bow tie that constituted the Pinnacle's uniform. She had heard whispers about William Thornton during her brief training, but the other servers had been vague, their eyes darting nervously whenever his name was mentioned. All she knew was that he was important, demanding, and that making a mistake with his table could end her career before it had even begun. David pulled her aside as the lunch crowd began to arrive. His usually composed face showed signs of stress, beads of sweat forming at his temples despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. "Listen, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Mr. Thornton will be here in 20 minutes. I wouldn't normally put you on his table, but we have no choice today. Just don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't spill anything. Your job depends on it. All of our jobs might depend on it." Eleanor nodded, though confusion creased her brow. "Is he really that bad? I mean, he's just a customer, right?" David's laugh was bitter and devoid of humor. "William Thornton owns half this city. He had the last server who displeased him not only fired, but made sure she couldn't get a job anywhere in Chicago. She had to move back to Ohio to find work. So no, Elena, he's not just a customer. As Elena prepared Thornton's table, making sure every piece of silverware was aligned with military precision, she noticed how the entire restaurant's atmosphere shifted when the elevator doors opened at exactly 12:30. William Thornton entered like a storm system moving in from the lake, inevitable, powerful, and threatening destruction to anything in its path. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with silver hair that looked like it cost more to maintain than most people's rent. His suit was clearly custom-tailored, the kind of perfection that only came from London's Savile Row. His shoes clicked against the marble floor with metronomic precision, and his eyes, cold and grey as winter steel, swept the room with the calculating gaze of a predator, surveying his territory. Behind him walked two men who could only be bodyguards, their presence a silent reminder that Thornton's wealth made him both powerful and paranoid. They took positions at nearby tables, their backs to the wall, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Elena watched from the service station as Thornton sat down without acknowledging anyone's existence. Other diners at nearby tables unconsciously leaned away from him, their conversations dropping to whispers. She took a deep breath, picked up the water pitcher with hands she willed to steadiness, and approached the table. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice clear despite her nerves. "I'll be taking care of you today. May I start you with... You're new." It wasn't a question. Thornton's voice was like gravel wrapped in silk, smooth on the surface but rough underneath. He didn't look at her, instead examining his phone with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. "Yes, sir. This is my first week." "Then you don't know the rules." He finally looked up, and Elena felt the full weight of his gaze. It was like being examined by a machine designed to find flaws. "Rule 1, I don't like new servers. Rule 2, I don't like incompetence. Rule 3, I don't give second chances. Bring me my usual, and if anything is wrong, you'll be looking for a new job by sunset. Clear?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her professional composure. "Crystal clear, Mr. Thornton. Your usual will be right out." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You didn't ask what my usual is. Dry-aged ribeye, medium rare with Maison Laurent mustard. The 1982 Chateau Margaux served at 64 degrees. Water glass never less than half full. Bread basket refreshed every 12 minutes. She had done her homework, studying the notes left by previous servers like they were sacred texts. For the first time, something flickered in Thornton's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe just annoyance that she had denied him an opportunity to berate her. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand that suggested she was no more significant than a fly to be brushed away. As Elena placed Thornton's order and began the careful orchestration of his meal, she noticed an elderly man at a corner table. He was thin, wearing a suit that had seen better days, and his hands shook slightly as he studied the menu through thick glasses. There was something dignified about him despite his obvious frailty, the way he sat straight-backed and proper, as if good posture could compensate for whatever life had taken from him. The elderly man caught Elena's eye and offered a gentle smile. "Miss, when you have a moment—" "I'll be right with you, sir," Elena promised. But before she could move, David appeared at her elbow. "Thornton's table only," he hissed. "Someone else will handle the old man." "But there is no one else available right now." "Then he waits. Thornton's steak is ready." Elena carried the perfectly prepared meal to Thornton's table, setting it down with the precision of a surgeon. The mustard was in its proper place. The wine was at the exact temperature, and she had already refreshed his water glass twice. Thornton cut into the steak, examined the pink center with the intensity of a diamond appraiser, and took a bite. He chewed slowly, his expression revealing nothing. "Acceptable," he finally said, which Elena had learned was the highest praise he ever offered. As she turned to check on the elderly gentleman, she saw him struggling to get the attention of another server who was deliberately avoiding eye contact, too busy with other tables to help someone who was clearly not a big spender. The old man's water glass had been empty for several minutes, and Elena noticed his medication sitting beside his plate, pills that likely needed to be taken with food and water. She glanced at Thornton, who was now engaged in a phone conversation that, from the fragments she could hear, involved the demolition of a low-income housing complex to make way for luxury condos. Her conscience warred with her survival instinct. David had been clear. Thornton's table only. But the elderly man looked increasingly distressed, his breathing becoming labored. Making a decision that would change everything, Elena quietly filled a water pitcher and walked to the elderly man's table. "Here you are, sir. I'm so sorry for the wait. What can I get for you today?" The relief on his face was profound. "Thank you, dear. Just a bowl of soup, please. The minestrone, if you have it. And perhaps some crackers. I need to take my medication. Right away, sir." Eleanor had just turned toward the kitchen when Thornton's voice cracked like a whip across the restaurant. "Waitress!" The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned to watch what everyone knew would be a public execution. Elena walked back to Thornton's table, her spine straight, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "Did I or did I not make it clear that you were to attend to my table exclusively?" His voice was dangerously quiet, the calm before the storm. "You did, Mr. Thornton. And yet you walked away to serve that—" He gestured dismissively at the elderly man. "That nobody. Do you have any idea who I am? What I could do to you?" Elena felt the familiar fight-or-flight response flooding her system, but something else rose with it, a memory of her grandmother, who had worked 3 jobs to put Elena through college, who had taught her that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you unless you gave it away. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thornton," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. "You're a man who has confused wealth with worth, power with purpose. You're someone who believes that money gives you the right to treat people as less than human." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. David looked like he might faint. Even Thornton's bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether this constituted a threat requiring their intervention. Thornton's face flushed red, then purple. "How dare you—" "I dare!" Elena interrupted. And the shock of being interrupted rendered Thornton momentarily speechless. "Because that elderly gentleman you just called a nobody is Professor Emeritus Dr. James Wheeler. He taught economics at the University of Chicago for 40 years. He served 2 tours in Vietnam, has 3 Purple Hearts, and spent his retirement savings caring for his wife through Alzheimer's until she passed last month. He comes here once a month on his wedding anniversary, because this is where he proposed to her 60 years ago. He orders soup because it's all he can afford, and he needs water for his heart medication. So, yes, Mr. Thornton, I walked away from your table to help him, because unlike you, he treats everyone with respect, including the people who serve him." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. It was as if everyone had collectively stopped breathing, waiting to see what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. Thornton stood slowly, his full height meant to be intimidating. "You're fired, and I'll make sure you never work in this city again. By tomorrow, every restaurant, every cafe, every bar in Chicago will know your name, and not in a good way." "Then they'll know the name of someone who finally told you the truth," Eleanor replied, untying her apron with steady hands. "They'll know the name of someone who wasn't afraid of you, and maybe, just maybe, that will inspire others to stop fearing you too." She folded her apron neatly and placed it on the table. "You know what the real tragedy is, Mr. Thornton. It's not that you're cruel, it's that you're empty. You've built walls of money and power around yourself so high that you've forgotten what it feels like to be human. You eat alone at that table twice a week, you never smile, and the only time people speak to you is when they're paid to, or when they want something. That's not power, Mr. Thornton, that's prison. And you're both the warden and the inmate." Eleanor turned to leave, but then paused, looking back one more time. "Oh, and your steak. The chef spits on it. Every single time. He told me on my first day. Apparently you foreclosed on his mother's house last year. She'd missed 3 payments while recovering from cancer surgery. The whole kitchen knows. They think it's hilarious that the great William Thornton has been eating their saliva for 2 years. The color drained from Thornton's face. He looked down at his half-eaten steak, and for the first time in years, his carefully maintained composure cracked. Elena walked over to Dr. Wheeler's table. "I'm sorry, sir, but I won't be able to serve you today. However—" She pulled $40 from her pocket, most of her remaining money, and placed it on his table. "Please, have anything you'd like. It's on me. Thank you for your service, both to our country and to generations of students." The old professor's eyes filled with tears. "My dear, I can't—" "Please, it would be my honor." As Elena walked toward the exit, something unexpected happened. It started with one person, a woman in her 30s sitting near the window. She began to clap, slowly, deliberately. Then another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant, except for Thornton and his bodyguards, was applauding. Some stood. A few cheered. David Chen watched in amazement as his worst nightmare transformed into something else entirely. Several diners approached him, business cards in hand, job offers on their lips for the brave young woman who stood up to Thornton. But the most remarkable reaction came from Thornton himself. He stood frozen, his half-eaten steak forgotten, watching as Elena disappeared through the door. For the first time in decades, he was seeing himself reflected not in mirrors or windows or the fearful eyes of subordinates, but in the honest words of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to say. If you're moved by Elena's courage and want to see how this story unfolds, please remember to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you'll know as soon as we post the next part of this incredible journey. Your support means everything to us and helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Eleanor stepped out onto Michigan Avenue, the October wind whipping her hair around her face. She had no job, almost no money, and had just made an enemy of one of Chicago's most powerful men. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in the city: free. Her phone buzzed before she had walked a block. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Rodriguez? This is Margaret Chen from Chen Industries. I was at the restaurant just now. I'd like to offer you a position as my executive assistant. The pay is $90,000 a year to start. Full benefits, and I promise you'll never have to serve another entitled millionaire his lunch. Elena stopped walking, her mind struggling to process the words. I don't understand. You don't even know me. On the contrary, Margaret Chen's voice was warm with admiration. I just watched you display more courage and integrity in 5 minutes than I've seen from most people in a lifetime. Anyone who can stand up to William Thornton like that is exactly the kind of person I want on my team. Can you start Monday? Yes, Elena breathed, barely believing this was real. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. My office will email you the details. Oh, and Miss Rodriguez, what you said about Thornton being in a prison of his own making. That was the truest thing anyone said in that restaurant in years. As Eleanor ended the call, her phone immediately rang again. Then again. By the time she reached her small studio apartment in Uptown, she had received 7 job offers, each more generous than the last. The video of her confrontation with Thornton, secretly recorded by multiple diners, had already gone viral, with the hashtag "The Waitress Who Stood Up" trending across social media. But while Elena's life was taking an unexpected turn towards success, William Thornton sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the city lights below. His phone had been ringing non-stop. Board members, investors, reporters all wanting to know about the incident at the Pinnacle. He had ignored them all. Instead, he found himself replaying Elena's words over and over. The prison metaphor haunted him. He looked around his office, all glass and chrome and expensive art that he never really looked at. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without an agenda? When had he last had a conversation that wasn't about money or power or acquisition? His reflection in the window showed a man he barely recognized. When had his eyes become so cold? When had the lines around his mouth become permanently set in a frown? He tried to remember the last time he had genuinely smiled and couldn't. Thornton picked up his phone and did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called his daughter. "Victoria, it's Dad." The silence on the other end stretched for so long he thought she might have hung up. "Why are you calling?" Her voice was cold, distant. "Need me to sign something? Another NDA about family business?" "No, I wanted to hear your voice." "Since when?" "You haven't wanted to hear my voice since Mom died. That was 17 years ago, Dad. 17 years of nothing but lawyers and legal documents and birthday cards signed by your secretary." Thornton closed his eyes. His wife's death from cancer had been the moment everything changed, the moment he had decided that feeling nothing was better than feeling pain. He had built his empire on that emptiness, filling the void with money and power and the fear of others. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I've been a terrible father." "You've been no father at all," Victoria replied. "A father shows up. A father cares. You've been a stranger who happens to share my DNA." "You're right." The admission felt like pulling glass from a wound, painful but necessary. "A waitress told me something today. She said I was in a prison of my own making. She was right about that too." "A waitress? You're calling me because a waitress hurt your feelings?" No, I'm calling because she woke me up. Victoria, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't fix 17 years, but I'm sorry. There was a long pause. Then Victoria's voice, softer now but still guarded. Are you dying? Is this some kind of terminal diagnosis confession? No, nothing like that. I'm just tired of being alone. Tired of being feared instead of loved. Tired of being the man everyone whispers about but no one actually knows. Then change, Victoria said simply. You have more money than God, Dad. Use it for something other than destroying neighborhoods and crushing competitors. Be someone other than William Thornton, the corporate monster. I don't know how, he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice surprised them both. Then learn. The same way you learn to be cruel, one day at a time, one choice at a time. But Dad, don't call me again until you've actually changed something. I've had enough empty promises from you to last a lifetime. She hung up, leaving Thornton alone with the Chicago skyline and his thoughts. He walked to his computer and pulled up the viral video of Elena's confrontation. He watched it 7 times, each viewing revealing something new. The disappointment in her eyes, the pity in her voice when she called him empty, the genuine concern she showed for the elderly professor, the professor, Dr. James Wheeler. Thornton knew that name. He pulled up his files and found it. Wheeler had been one of the economists who had publicly opposed Thornton's development of the South Side, arguing that it would displace thousands of working families. Thornton had destroyed Wheeler's consulting firm in retaliation, using his influence to pull contracts and dry up funding. The realization that he had been sharing a restaurant with a man whose life he had ruined, never even recognizing him, hit Thornton like a physical blow. How many others were there? How many lives had he destroyed without even remembering their faces? He picked up his phone again and called David Chen at the Pinnacle. Mr. Thornton, David's voice was nervous. About today, I want to apologize. Is Professor Wheeler still there? Yes, sir. He's finishing his soup. Put him on the phone. There was confused shuffling, whispered explanations, then an elderly voice, cautious and dignified. This is James Wheeler. Professor Wheeler, this is William Thornton. I owe you an apology. Not just for today, but for what I did to your consulting firm 8 years ago. I destroyed your business because you opposed me, and I never gave it a second thought. I'm sorry. The silence stretched out before Wheeler responded. Mr. Thornton, do you know what the cruelest thing about what you did was? It wasn't the financial loss. It was that you made it personal, made it vicious, and then forgot about it entirely. I was just another casualty in your war against anyone who disagreed with you. My wife and I lost our retirement savings. She spent her last years worried about money when she should have been at peace. Thornton felt each word like a knife. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. Yes, it is inadequate. But it's also the first human thing I've heard you say in the 8 years I've been watching you eat in that restaurant. That young woman today, she did something I never had the courage to do. She held up a mirror to your face. The question is, Mr. Thornton, what are you going to do with what you saw? I don't know yet, Thornton admitted, but I want to start by making things right. Your consulting firm. I want to restore what I took, with interest. And your wife's medical bills, I want to cover those retroactively. My wife is dead, Mr. Thornton. Your money can't bring her back. No, but it can ensure you don't spend your remaining years in poverty because of my cruelty. Please, Professor, let me do this one thing right. Wheeler was quiet for a moment. You know what would really make a difference? Not your money, but your influence. There's a community center on the south side, the one your development is about to demolish. It serves 3,000 kids, runs after-school programs, keeps them off the streets. Save it. Save it and fund it. Give those kids a chance at the kind of education that creates Elena Rodriguez's instead of William Thornton's. Done, Thornton said without hesitation. What else? What else? Wheeler sounded surprised. Mr. Thornton, redemption isn't a shopping list you can check off. It's a complete transformation of who you are. If you're serious about changing, it's going to take more than grand gestures. It's going to take humility, consistency, and the willingness to face every person you've hurt. Then I'll face them. All of them. We'll see, Wheeler said skeptically. Words are easy, Mr. Thornton. It's actions that matter. After the call ended, Thornton sat in his office until well past midnight making lists. Lists of people he had destroyed, lists of neighborhoods he had gentrified, lists of employees he had terminated for petty reasons. The lists grew longer and longer, a catalogue of cruelty that spanned decades. Meanwhile, Elena was experiencing her own transformation. The job with Margaret Chen's company, it turned out, was more than just an executive assistant position. Margaret was a tech entrepreneur who had built her fortune on ethical business practices and social responsibility, the antithesis of everything Thornton represented. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to him for years," Margaret told Elena on her first day. The fact that it was a 26-year-old waitress with nothing to lose makes it even more perfect. "You've started something, Elena. The question is, what do we do with it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that video has been viewed 12 million times. You've become a symbol. People are calling you the voice of every service worker who's ever been demeaned, every employee who's ever been bullied by someone with power. We could harness that, create real change." Elena shook her head. "I didn't plan any of this. I just couldn't stand watching him anymore. The way he treated people, the casual cruelty of it." "The best revolutionaries never plan to be," Margaret smiled. "They just reach a point where staying silent becomes more painful than speaking up." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't intended to start. Service workers from across Chicago began sharing their own stories of abuse by wealthy customers. The hashtag evolved from "Sock the Waitress Who Stood Up" to "Stand Up to Them," and suddenly Elena was being invited to speak at labor rallies and workers' rights conferences. But the most surprising development came 3 weeks after the incident at the Pinnacle. Elena was leaving Margaret's office when she found William Thornton waiting by her car in the parking garage. Her first instinct was fear. Had he come for revenge? But as he stepped into the light, she saw something different in his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, and she noticed he used her name with respect this time. "I owe you an apology." "You owe a lot of people apologies, Mr. Thornton. I'm probably the least important on that list." "No," he disagreed. "You're the most important, because you're the only one who told me the truth. Everyone else was either too afraid or too invested in my money, to be honest. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you still stood up to me." "I couldn't afford not to," Elena replied. "My grandmother taught me that poverty is not having money. Real poverty is losing your dignity. You tried to take that from me, from everyone who worked in that restaurant. I know, I've been taking things from people my whole adult life. Their dignity, their homes, their hopes." He pulled out an envelope. "This isn't a bribe or an attempt to buy forgiveness. It's a business proposal." Eleanor looked at the envelope suspiciously. "What kind of proposal?" "I'm liquidating half my assets to create a foundation. It will focus on affordable housing, workers' rights, and education for underprivileged kids. I want you to run it." Eleanor actually laughed. "You want me, the waitress you tried to destroy, to run your redemption project? I want the woman who had the courage to tell me I was in a prison to help me tear down the walls. I want someone who understands what it's like to struggle, who knows the value of $40 and the weight of dignity. I want someone I can't intimidate or buy. And you think throwing money at the problem will fix everything you've broken?" "No," Thornton admitted, "but it's a start, and I have to start somewhere, or I'll die in that prison you described, alone, empty, feared, but never loved." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. The man before her looked older than he had in the restaurant, as if the weight of realization had aged him years in weeks. "What about your business empire? Your board of directors?" "The board is furious. Stock prices have dropped 12% since the video went viral. Turns out being exposed as a monster isn't good for business." His smile was rueful. "But for the first time in 17 years, my daughter is speaking to me. That's worth more than any stock price." "Victoria?" Elena was surprised. "You're reconciling with your daughter?" "Trying to. She's making me work for it. Says I need to prove I've changed, not just promise it. She's right. That's why I need your help. I know how to make money, Miss Rodriguez. I know how to build empires and destroy enemies, but I don't know how to be human anymore. I forgot, somewhere along the way." Elena wanted to refuse. This man had tried to ruin her life just weeks ago. But something in his eyes, a genuine desperation, a real desire to change, made her pause. "If I agreed to this, and I'm not saying I will, there would be conditions." "Name them." "First, the foundation operates independently. You provide the money, but you don't make the decisions. Second, we start by helping everyone you've directly hurt, and I mean everyone. Third, you publicly apologize. Not a press release written by publicists, but a real, genuine apology where you face the people you've wronged. Done, all of it. And fourth, Elena continued, you work in a service job for 6 months, minimum wage, no special treatment. You want to understand humanity again? Start by understanding what it's like to serve others instead of being served. Thornton's face paled. Service job? There's a homeless shelter on the south side. They need someone to serve meals, clean facilities, do intake paperwork. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 to midnight. The same days and hours you used to terrorize the Pinnacle. That would be humiliating? Difficult? Eye-opening? Elena suggested. Yes, it would be all of those things. That's the point, Mr. Thornton. You can't buy your way back to humanity. You have to earn it. Thornton was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. When do I start? Tomorrow. And Mr. Thornton, wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Real work tends to be messy. The next evening, William Thornton, billionaire real estate mogul, stood in the serving line of the Bright Hope shelter, wearing a hairnet and latex gloves, ladling soup into bowls held by people he had once stepped over on the street without a second thought. His hands, more accustomed to signing million-dollar deals than handling a ladle, shook slightly as he served. "Keep the line moving," barked Marcus, the shelter's coordinator who had been told nothing about Thornton's identity except that he was a new volunteer. "We've got 300 people to feed tonight." A woman approached the serving line, probably in her 40s but looking older, weathered by life on the streets. She held out her bowl, and Thornton filled it, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. "Thank you," she said simply, and something in those 2 words, the genuine gratitude for something as basic as a bowl of soup, cracked something open in Thornton's chest. "You're welcome," he managed, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. As the night wore on, Thornton served soup, cleaned tables, mopped floors, and listened to stories. The shelter's patrons, not knowing who he was, treated him like what he appeared to be, just another volunteer. They shared their tales of loss, addiction, mental illness, and sometimes just plain bad luck. More than a few mentioned losing their homes to development projects, and Thornton recognized his own company's fingerprints on their misfortune. During a break, he found himself sitting with a man named Jerome, a Vietnam veteran like Professor Wheeler, who had lost his home 3 years ago when Thornton's company had bought his apartment building and tripled the rent. "Wasn't always like this," Jerome said, gesturing at the shelter. "Had a good job, nice place, dignity. Then some rich developer decided my neighborhood was ready for improvement. Improved me right onto the street." "I'm sorry," Thornton said, meaning it more than he had ever meant anything. Jerome shrugged. "Ain't your fault, unless you're secretly some billionaire slumming it for kicks." He laughed at his own joke, not noticing how Thornton flinched. Meanwhile, Elena was setting up the foundation with Margaret Chen's help. They had already identified 50 families displaced by Thornton's developments who needed immediate assistance. The community center Professor Wheeler had mentioned was saved with a massive donation and a guarantee of funding for the next 20 years. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. She was reviewing applications for the foundation's board when her phone rang. It was David Chen from the Pinnacle. "Elena, I wanted to call and apologize. For that day, for not standing up for you, for—" "It's okay, David. You were protecting your job. I understand." "No, it's not okay. I watched him humiliate people for years, and I said nothing because I was afraid. You were there 3 days, and you did what none of us could do in years. You stood up. And got fired for it," Elena reminded him with a slight laugh. "Best thing that could have happened from what I hear. Margaret Chen is a legend. And the foundation you're setting up, it's all anyone's talking about. Is it true Thornton is volunteering at a homeless shelter?" "Every Tuesday and Thursday," Elena confirmed. 6 to midnight. "I still can't believe it. William Thornton, serving soup to homeless people. What did you say to him that day that changed him so dramatically?" Eleanor thought about it. "I think I just reminded him that he was human. Sometimes that's all any of us need. Someone to hold up a mirror and refuse to look away while we see what we've become." 6 months passed. William Thornton's transformation became the talk of Chicago, though he refused all interviews and made no public statements beyond the apology Elena had demanded. That apology, delivered at a packed community meeting in the South Side, had been painful to watch. Thornton had stood before hundreds of people whose lives he had disrupted, without security, without prepared remarks, and admitted to every cruel thing he had done. Some people walked out, others yelled, A few threw things, but many eventually listened. "I can't undo what I've done," he had said, his voice steady despite the hostile crowd. "I can't bring back the homes you lost, the businesses I destroyed, the dignity I tried to strip away. But I can spend whatever time I have left trying to make it right, not because I expect forgiveness, but because it's the only way I can live with myself." The foundation, under Elena's leadership, had already helped relocate 200 families into affordable housing, provided small business loans to entrepreneurs Thornton had once crushed, and funded legal aid for workers fighting unfair labor practices. But more importantly, it had started a conversation about power, dignity, and the responsibility of wealth. Eleanor often thought about that day in the Pinnacle, how a moment of anger and frustration had changed so many lives. She had kept in touch with Professor Wheeler, who had become an advisor to the foundation, and even David Chen, who had finally found the courage to leave the Pinnacle and open his own restaurant, one where every customer was treated with equal respect. But the most surprising relationship was the one that developed between Elena and Victoria Thornton. They had met at a foundation event, and Victoria had approached Elena with tears in her eyes. "You gave me my father back," Victoria had said. "He's not perfect, he's still learning, but for the first time in 17 years he's trying. He actually called me on my birthday. Not his secretary, him. We talked for 2 hours about nothing important, and it was the best gift I've ever received." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. William Thornton had arrived, but not in his usual chauffeured car. He came on the bus, still wearing his volunteer shirt from the shelter, looking tired but somehow more alive than he had in years. "Sorry I'm late," he said to Eleanor. "We had a situation at the shelter. New family came in, kids were scared, needed extra time to get them settled." Eleanor studied him. 6 months ago he wouldn't have noticed scared children, much less stayed late to help them. "How were things tonight?" "Good. Jerome got into transitional housing. The Foundation's program came through. He starts his new job Monday." Thornton's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his entire face. "He doesn't know I had anything to do with it, and I want to keep it that way." "Why?" Elena asked, curious. "Because it's not about me getting credit or feeling good about myself. It's about Jerome getting his dignity back, the same dignity I helped steal. The anonymity is part of my penance." Later that evening, as the Foundation event wound down, Elena found herself on the balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The same view, she realized, that could be seen from the Pinnacle, though from a different angle. Thornton joined her, both of them quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "That day standing up to me, everything that followed?" "No," Elena said without hesitation. "Do you regret what I said?" "I regret that it took a 26-year-old waitress to say what everyone around me should have been saying for years. But no, I don't regret hearing it. That prison metaphor you used, it saved my life. I was dying in there, surrounded by all that wealth and power, completely alone." "You're not alone anymore," Elena observed. "I saw you talking with Jerome and the others at the shelter. They consider you a friend now. They still don't know who I really am. Maybe that's who you really are now, the man who serves soup and stays late to comfort scared children. Maybe William Thornton, the billionaire bully, was the fake person, and this is you becoming real." Thornton considered this. "You know, I haven't eaten at the Pinnacle since that day." "Afraid of the spit?" Eleanor asked with a slight smile. "No," he laughed, a genuine sound that would have shocked anyone who knew him before. "Afraid of the emptiness, that table, that perfect view, that imported mustard. None of it means anything if you're eating alone. If everyone around you is terrified to speak honestly, I'd rather eat a sandwich at the shelter with Jerome and the others. At least there, the conversation is real." "Speaking of real conversation," Elena said, "I have something to tell you. I'm leaving the Foundation." Thornton's face fell. "What? Why? Is it something I did?" "No, it's something I need to do. The Foundation is established now, running smoothly. You've got a great team in place, but I've been accepted to law school, University of Chicago, full scholarship. I want to be able to fight for workers' rights in courtrooms, not just boardrooms." That's amazing, Elena. Professor Wheeler wrote your recommendation, didn't he?" "He did. Said I reminded him of his best students, passionate, unafraid, and unwilling to accept injustice as inevitable." "He's right." Thornton was quiet for a moment. "You know, when you graduate, the Foundation will need legal counsel, someone who understands our mission, who won't let us slide back into old patterns. Ask me again in 3 years, Elena said. But Mr. Thornton, William, promise me something. Anything. Don't stop going to the shelter when your 6 months are up. Those people, that work, that's what's keeping you human. The moment you think you're too good for it, too important, too busy, that's when the prison walls start building again. I promise. Actually, Marcus asked if I wanted to take on more shifts. Apparently, I'm getting pretty good with the soup ladle. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. The Chicago wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of traffic and life from the streets below. It was the same city where they had met in confrontation, but somehow it looked different now, fuller of possibility, of redemption, of second chances. I owe you everything, Thornton said quietly. No, Eleanor corrected. You owe everyone you hurt a chance at a better life. I was just the messenger. The work, the change, the choice to become someone different. That was all you. As if to punctuate the moment, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a text from Professor Wheeler. Watching the news. They're doing a segment on the Foundation's latest project. 20 families moving into new homes tomorrow. You did this, my dear. You and your courage. She showed the text to Thornton, who smiled. 20 more next month, if the paperwork goes through. From the man who once evicted 20 families in a day. That man is dead, Thornton said firmly. Or at least I'm trying to kill him a little more each day. A year later, Elena stood in a courtroom for her first case as a legal intern, representing workers who had been wrongfully terminated by a large corporation. Across the gallery, she spotted William Thornton, who had come to watch. He looked different now, the expensive suits replaced by simple, quality clothing, the cold eyes warm with interest and support. He had kept his promise, still volunteering at the shelter 3 nights a week now, and had given away 70% of his wealth to various causes. But the biggest change was in how others reacted to him. The fear was gone, replaced by something Elena hadn't expected. Respect. Real respect. Not the kind that money could buy, but the kind that came from watching someone face their demons and choose to change. After the hearing, which Elena won, Thornton approached her. Brilliant argumentation, he said. You reminded me of someone in there, a young waitress who once stood up to a bully and changed his life. That waitress was terrified, Elena admitted. She just refused to show it. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Thornton quoted. It's action in the face of fear. Professor Wheeler taught me that. He teaches economics at the community center now, you know. Free classes for anyone who wants to learn. I know. I helped him set up the program. They walked out of the courthouse together, an unlikely pair, the former billionaire bully and the former waitress who had brought him down and then helped him back up. The Chicago sun was shining, unusual for March, and the city seemed to pulse with energy and possibility. I have news, Thornton said. Victoria's pregnant. I'm going to be a grandfather. Eleanor's face lit up. William, that's wonderful. How's Victoria feeling about it? Excited, nervous. She says she wants her child to know me, the real me, not the man I used to be. She wants them to know their grandfather as someone who made mistakes but learned from them. That's beautiful. She also said she wants you to be the godmother. Elena stopped walking. What? But I barely know Victoria. You know her father. You saved him. In her mind, that makes you family. Thornton's voice was thick with emotion. Elena, you need to understand something. That day at the Pinnacle, you didn't just change my life. You saved it. I was on a path to dying alone, hated, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing. You gave me the chance to become someone my daughter could respect, someone my grandchild could be proud of. How do I ever repay that? You already have, Elena said. Every family you've housed, every worker you've helped, every night you spend at that shelter, that's the repayment. Not to me, but to the world you spent so long taking from. They parted ways at the courthouse steps, Thornton heading to the shelter for his afternoon shift, Eleanor returning to her studies. But as she walked away, Eleanor reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A single moment of courage, of refusing to be diminished, had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. The video of her confrontation with Thornton still circulated online, shown in business ethics classes and labor rights seminars. But what most people didn't know was the rest of the story, how the bully became an advocate, how the waitress became a lawyer, how enemies became something like friends. 3 years later, Eleanor graduated law school at the top of her class. The ceremony was packed, but in the crowd she spotted a familiar group, Professor Wheeler, David Chen, Margaret Chen, Victoria Thornton with her toddler, and William Thornton himself, greyer now, but with a peace in his face that hadn't been there before. After the ceremony, they gathered for dinner, not at the Pinnacle, which had closed after a labor scandal, but at David Chen's new restaurant, where every table had the same view and every customer got the same respect. "A toast," Professor Wheeler proposed, raising his glass, "to the courage to speak truth to power, to the wisdom to listen when truth is spoken," Thornton countered. "To second chances," Victoria added, her daughter playing with Elena's graduation cap. "To dignity," Eleanor concluded, "the one thing no one can take from you unless you let them." As they clinked glasses, Eleanor thought about that terrified girl who had walked into the Pinnacle 3 years ago, desperate for a job, $43 in her bank account. She thought about the moment she had decided that keeping her dignity was worth more than keeping her job. She thought about all the people who had been inspired to stand up because she had stood first. But mostly, she thought about redemption. Not the grand, dramatic kind from movies, but the slow, difficult daily choice to be better than you were yesterday. William Thornton was proof that even the worst people could change if they truly wanted to. The shelter knew him now as Bill, the Tuesday night volunteer who knew everyone's name and story, who stayed late without being asked, who had become genuinely friends with people he once would have stepped over on the street. "You know," Thornton said during dinner, "I've been thinking about that prison metaphor you used." "Still?" Eleanor laughed. "That was 3 years ago. It stays with me, but I've realized something. We're all in prisons of our own making. Mine was made of money and power, but there are prisons of fear, of insecurity, of prejudice. The lucky ones are those who find someone brave enough to point out the bars, and brave enough to help tear them down," Professor Wheeler added, looking meaningfully at Elena. After dinner, as the group prepared to part ways, Victoria pulled Elena aside. "I never properly thanked you," she said, shifting her daughter to her other hip, "for giving me my father back." "He gave himself back," Elena corrected. "I just held up a mirror." "No, you did more than that. You showed him that change was possible. You proved that redemption isn't just a concept, it's a choice repeated daily until it becomes who you are." Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. "My daughter will grow up with a grandfather who reads to her, who takes her to feed ducks, who teaches her about kindness and humility. That wouldn't have happened without you." As Elena walked home that night, her law degree under her arm and job offers from 3 major firms in her pocket, she made a decision. She would take the job with the smallest firm, the one that represented workers and unions and people who couldn't afford high-powered lawyers. It paid the least, but meant the most. She thought about calling William to tell him, then decided against it. He would find out soon enough, probably when she faced his former colleagues in court, defending the very people they were trying to exploit. The thought made her smile. The waitress who had stood up to power was about to become the lawyer who fought it in court. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Rodriguez, you don't know me, but I saw your graduation announcement in the paper. 3 years ago, I was at the Pinnacle when you stood up to William Thornton. I was too scared to clap that day, too afraid of losing my own job. But watching you gave me courage. I reported my boss for harassment the next week. I started my own company last year. Today I employ 15 people, and we treat each other with dignity and respect. Thank you for showing me that standing up was possible. Sarah Mitchell." Eleanor read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she had chosen law, why she had turned down the corporate offers. Not for the money or prestige, but for the chance to keep standing up, to keep holding mirrors to those who needed to see themselves clearly. The next morning, she started her new job at the Workers' Rights Legal Clinic. Her first client was a server at a high-end restaurant, fired for refusing to accept abuse from a wealthy customer. The parallel wasn't lost on Elena. "They said I should have just taken it," the young man said, his voice shaking. "That the customer is always right, especially when they're rich." "No one is always right," Elena said firmly. "And wealth doesn't give anyone the right to treat you as less than human. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." As she prepared the case, Eleanor's mind wandered to that day at the Pinnacle. She could still feel the weight of that water pitcher in her hands, still hear the silence that had fallen over the restaurant when she spoke up. She had been nobody then, just a new waitress with nothing to lose. But sometimes, she reflected, the nobodies were the only ones who could tell the somebodies the truths they needed to hear. 5 years after the incident at the Pinnacle, Elena stood before the Illinois Supreme Court, arguing a landmark case about workers' rights. In the gallery sat William Thornton, Professor Wheeler, and dozens of workers whose lives had been changed by the precedents Elena had set in lower courts. She had become known as the lawyer who didn't back down, who took on the cases others wouldn't touch, who stood up to power with the same fearlessness she had shown as a waitress. Her closing argument that day would later be studied in law schools across the country. Your Honours, we stand at a crossroads between two visions of society. In one, wealth and power grant immunity from basic human decency. In the other, every person, regardless of their economic status, is entitled to dignity and respect. The law must not be a prison that traps the vulnerable while freeing the powerful. It must be a mirror that shows us all clearly and without distortion who we are and who we ought to be. The court ruled unanimously in favor of her clients. As Elena left the courthouse, she was surrounded by reporters, all wanting to know how she had become such a fierce advocate for workers' rights. "It started with a glass of water," she said, smiling at the confusion on their faces. "A glass of water, and the decision that my dignity was worth more than my fear." William Thornton waited until the crowd dispersed, then approached her. "That was brilliant," he said. "You've become everything I once feared, someone who can't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. And you've become everything you once mocked, someone who serves others without expecting anything in return." They walked together toward the shelter where Thornton still volunteered, now as a member of their board of directors. The building had been expanded with donations from the foundation and could now house twice as many families. "Jerome asked about you," Thornton said. "He's a supervisor at his job now. Still doesn't know about my past, but he considers me a friend. Real friend. That's because you are a real friend now. The man Jerome knows, Bill the volunteer, that's who you really are." William Thornton, the billionaire, was the mask. As they reached the shelter, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She was wearing a server's uniform from a nearby restaurant, and her eyes were red from crying. "Excuse me, are you Elena Rodriguez?" "The lawyer." "I am. How can I help you?" I just got fired for refusing to accept abuse from a customer. They said I was being too sensitive, that I should have just smiled and taken it, but I remembered your story, how you stood up, and I tried to do the same. Now I don't know what to do." Eleanor exchanged glances with Thornton, who nodded slightly. "What's your name?" Elena asked gently. "Maria. Maria Santos." "Well, Maria, you did the right thing. Standing up for your dignity is never wrong, even when it costs you." Elena pulled out her business card. "Call my office tomorrow. We'll take your case pro bono. And Maria, you're not too sensitive. You're human, demanding to be treated as such. Never apologize for that." As Maria walked away, clutching the business card like a lifeline, Thornton shook his head in wonder. "It never ends, does it? The cycle of people with power abusing those without." "No," Elena agreed, "but neither does the cycle of people standing up, one at a time, until standing becomes the norm and kneeling becomes the exception." They parted ways at the shelter entrance, Thornton going in for his evening shift, Elena heading to her office to prepare for Maria's case. As she walked, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them all here. A moment of courage had become a movement. A bully had become an advocate. A waitress had become a voice for the voiceless. But most importantly, a room full of people who had been too afraid to speak had learned that silence in the face of injustice was complicity. The ripples from that day at the Pinnacle continued to spread, touching lives in ways Elena never could have imagined when she had put down that water pitcher and spoken truth to power. The epilogue of this story came 10 years after that fateful day. The Pinnacle had been transformed into a cooperative restaurant where all workers shared ownership and decisions were made democratically. David Chen was the managing partner, and they had a strict policy. Every customer, regardless of wealth or status, was treated with equal respect. William Thornton had given away 90% of his wealth by then, keeping just enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. He spent his days working at the shelter and serving on the boards of various non-profits. His relationship with Victoria had healed completely, and his granddaughter called him Grandpa Bill, and thought he had always been the kind, gentle man who taught her to treat everyone with respect. Professor Wheeler had written a book about the incident and its aftermath, titled The Waitress Who Stood, A Study in Courage and Redemption. It became required reading in business ethics courses across the country. And Elena, she had argued 3 cases before the United States Supreme Court, winning all of them. She had established the Rodriguez Foundation for Workers' Rights, funded partially by an anonymous donor everyone knew was Thornton. She had married a fellow lawyer who shared her passion for justice, and they had 2 children whom they were raising to understand that standing up for what's right was always worth the risk. On the 10th anniversary of the incident, they all gathered at what had once been the Pinnacle. The new cooperative had organized a celebration, and workers from across the city came to honor the moment that had changed so many lives. Elena was asked to speak. She stood at the same spot where she had confronted Thornton a decade earlier, looking out at a crowd that included servers, lawyers, activists, and even a few reformed executives who had learned from Thornton's transformation. 10 years ago, she began, I was a frightened waitress with $43 in my bank account and nothing to lose but my dignity. I stood here and told a powerful man that he was in a prison of his own making. What I didn't realize then was that we were all in prisons. The prison of fear, the prison of silence, the prison of accepting injustice as inevitable. But here's what I've learned. Prisons are only as strong as our willingness to remain in them. Every time we stand up, we weaken the bars. Every time we speak truth to power, we crack the walls. Every time we choose dignity over security, courage over comfort, we move closer to freedom. William Thornton once tried to fire me for serving water to a man he deemed unworthy of service. Today, that same William Thornton serves soup to hundreds of people society deems unworthy. That transformation didn't happen because of one confrontation. It happened because he chose day after day to be better, to do better, to see people as human beings deserving of respect regardless of their bank accounts. So I challenge all of you, find your prison, name it, and then, with the help of others who have found their freedom, tear it down. Stand up, speak out, refuse to be diminished, because dignity isn't something anyone can give you or take from you. It's something you claim, hold, and defend. 10 years ago, I was nobody. Today, I'm still nobody special. I'm just someone who refused to be treated as less than human and found out that sometimes that's enough to change the world. The applause was thunderous. William Thornton stood with tears streaming down his face, no longer the man who had once terrorized this restaurant, but someone reborn through the simple act of choosing to change. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself once again on the balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Thornton joined her as she knew he would. Any regrets, he asked, echoing his question from years before. None, she replied. You? Only one, he said. I wish I had met you sooner. I wish someone had stood up to me decades ago. Think of all the harm that could have been prevented, all the good that could have been done. But then you wouldn't have the depth of understanding you have now, Eleanor pointed out. You wouldn't be able to connect with Jerome and the others at the shelter. Your transformation wouldn't inspire other wealthy people to examine their own behavior. Everything happened when it was supposed to happen. Do you really believe that? Eleanor considered the question. I believe that courage is contagious. I believe that one person standing up can inspire 100 others to stand. And I believe that redemption is possible for anyone who truly wants it and is willing to do the work. Even for someone like I was, especially for someone like you were. Because your transformation proves that power doesn't have to corrupt, that wealth doesn't have to isolate, that it's never too late to choose differently. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 unlikely friends whose confrontation had become a collaboration, whose moment of conflict had sparked a decade of positive change. You know what the irony is? Thornton said finally. I spent my whole life building walls, around properties, around myself, around my heart. And it took a waitress with a water pitcher to show me that the only thing walls are good for is tearing down. Elena smiled. Well, you've gotten pretty good at tearing them down. The shelter, the foundation, your work with former inmates, you've dismantled more walls in 10 years than you built in 40. It's not enough. It'll never be enough to balance the scales. No, Elena agreed. But it's not about balance. It's about direction. You changed direction, and that changed everything. As they left the restaurant that night, Elena reflected on the strange tapestry their lives had woven together. The millionaire and the waitress, the bully and the brave, the prison and the key. They had started as adversaries and become something more complex, not quite friends but fellow travelers on the path toward justice. The story of the waitress who silenced the millionaire had become legend in Chicago, told in different ways by different people. Some focused on Elena's courage, others on Thornton's transformation. But Eleanor knew the real story was bigger than both of them. It was about every person who had ever been belittled, dismissed, or dehumanized, finding the strength to say, "No more." It was about every person with power choosing to use it to lift others up rather than tear them down. As she drove home to her family, Eleanor passed the shelter where Thornton would be volunteering tomorrow night. She passed the community center Professor Wheeler had saved. She passed the buildings that now housed families instead of empty luxury condos. Each one was a testament to what could happen when someone stood up, when someone listened, when someone changed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Mom, we learned about you in social studies today, about how you stood up to that mean rich guy. Everyone thinks you're a hero." Eleanor smiled and texted back, "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who refused to be silent." Heroes are the people who choose to change, who face their mistakes and try to make them right. Like Mr. Thornton. The mean guy became good? The mean guy discovered he didn't have to be mean. He learned that being kind was actually much more powerful. As Elena pulled into her driveway, she saw her family waiting for her through the window, her husband helping their son with homework, her daughter setting the table for dinner. It was a simple life, far from the wealth and power of the Thorntons of the world, but it was built on dignity, respect, and love. She thought one more time about that day at the pinnacle, about the moment she had decided her dignity was worth more than her job. It had been a split-second choice that changed countless lives, but really, she reflected, every moment offered that same choice: to stand or kneel, to speak or stay silent, to accept injustice or fight it. Elena Rodriguez, who had once been a nobody waitress with $43 to her name, had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world was simply refusing to be powerless. And that lesson, more than any court case or legal victory, was her greatest achievement. The story could end here, but stories like this never really end. Every day, in restaurants and offices and factories around the world, someone faces the same choice Elena faced. Every day, someone with power has the opportunity to be either William Thornton the bully or William Thornton the redeemed. Every day the cycle continues, but perhaps that's the point. Change doesn't come from single dramatic moments, but from the accumulation of countless acts of courage, small and large. It comes from people refusing to accept that injustice is inevitable, that power must corrupt, that dignity is negotiable. 10 years after a waitress put down a water pitcher and stood up to a millionaire, the ripples continue to spread. In boardrooms where executives remember Thornton's fall and redemption before making decisions. In restaurants where servers know they have rights and dignity. In law schools where Elena's cases are studied. In homeless shelters where former billionaires serve soup and find their humanity. The waitress who stood up. The millionaire who fell and rose again. The professor who forgave. The daughter who reconciled. The workers who found their voices. Together, they wrote a story that proved that change is possible, redemption is real, and sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one with nothing to lose but their dignity. And that dignity, once claimed and defended, can indeed change the world. Thank you so much for joining us on this powerful journey of courage, redemption, and transformation. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power we all have to stand up for what's right, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that even the most powerful can change. Ring that notification bell to be the first to know when we share our next inspiring story. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you these incredible tales of human courage and redemption. Until next time, remember that you have the power to stand up, speak out, and change the world around you, one act of courage at a time.